ChatGerry TSI-Stroke multiplication structure with glucose, pulse pressure, and SBP, number 1645, May 16, 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, category, VPT Stroke. Special note, this research journal is based on my personal research using data from my own body and is provided for educational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. Introduction. After my hemorrhagic stroke on June 21, 2025, I started paying extremely close attention to the interaction among glucose, systolic blood pressure SBP, and pulse pressure PP equals SBP DBP. Over time, my defined TSI stroke equation gradually became more than a mathematical formula. It slowly turned into a real-time warning system inside my brain. Today, I watch these numbers continuously throughout the day. When my glucose rises slightly, I immediately pay closer attention to my SBP and PP. I often use breathing exercises to lower my SBP and keep my TSI stroke value below about 95, which I personally consider a safer zone. Through repeated daily observation, I gradually realized something important: glucose and blood pressure behave very differently. Inside the human body, glucose usually changes slowly and smoothly. It acts more like a long-term background stress that slowly damages blood vessels in my brain over many years. Blood pressure behaves very differently. SBP can rise and fall rapidly within minutes. These short spikes may only last briefly, but they can create very strong mechanical force on weakened blood vessels. This observation eventually led me to study not only statistical relationships, but also accumulated energy behavior inside the biomedical system. Purpose of this study: traditional medical research often uses statistical correlation to decide whether a factor is important. However, from my viewpoint, correlation only shows whether two curves move together over time. It mainly measures geometric similarity, but disease damage is not only geometry. Disease damage is also resulted from accumulated energy. For example, an earthquake may last only seconds, but the destructive energy can be enormous. Similarly, a short SBP spike may create a powerful triggering force even if its statistical correlation with the stroke risk appears low. Because of this, I used different approaches in this study: viscoplast topology, VPT analysis. Its geometric topology portion is used to study stroke trajectory shape, data connectivity, and synchronization behavior over time. Viscoplastic energy, VMT energy analysis. Its purpose is to study accumulated stress, energy buildup, and triggering force inside the biomedical system. The TSI stroke equation: stroke risk equals glucose 120 * SBP DBP 45 * SBP 120 * amplifier used multiplication because these variables interact with each other. Addition assumes independence, but multiplication represents amplification. Inside the human body, glucose, vascular stiffness, and blood pressure continuously influence one another. They do not work independently. That was why I did not use the addition operation. Instead, I used multiplication to represent their interaction and amplification effect inside the biomedical system. Data collection: the study used my own long-term data, including continuous glucose measurements, 96 measurements daily, repeated blood pressure measurements, 20 to 24 measurements daily. Pulse pressure calculations, PP equals SBP. This high-frequency monitoring allowed me to observe both short-term spikes and long-term trends together. Research results: statistical correlation analysis showed glucose versus TSI stroke, 60% pulse pressure versus TSI stroke, 50% SBP versus TSI stroke to 11%. From a traditional statistical viewpoint, one might conclude that glucose is the dominant factor while SBP is relatively unimportant. However, the VMT energy analysis showed something very different. The total energy contributions from all three variables were close to equal: glucose, 33%, pulse pressure, 34%, SBP, 33%. This finding became one of the most important observations of this study. What this means: statistical correlation and energy analysis are measuring different things. Correlation mainly measures curve similarity over time. Energy analysis measures accumulated stress and triggering force. Glucose behaves like a slow structural stressor that gradually weakens blood vessels over many years. Pulse pressure reflects vascular stiffness and aging. SBP behaves more like a mechanical hammer. Even short pressure spikes may create strong force capable of triggering vessel rupture. This explains why SBP may show low statistical correlation but still carry major physiological importance. These three variables behave differently geometrically, but their total energy effects can still become nearly equal. Why multiplication matters. This study also helped me understand why multiplication is important. If only one variable rises slightly, the total TSI stroke value may remain relatively stable. But if glucose, BP, and SBP all rise together, even moderately, the total stroke triggering energy can increase rapidly through amplification effect from interactions. This behavior resembles many biomedical systems where several interacting variables suddenly create instability. From my viewpoint, my stroke on June 21, 2025 was probably not caused by one isolated factor alone. Instead, it likely resulted from the interaction among 36 years of chronic diabetes, vascular stiffness, and aging. One acute SBP spike at 175 mmHg on June 21, 2025. These three factors working together over time. Post-stroke observation. Another important observation appeared after my stroke. From January 2026 to February 2026, my TSI stroke risk value actually decreased from 98.3 to 93.6, suggesting improvement. However, during the same period, my accumulated VMT energy increased sharply from 60.58% to 81.14%. This may mean that although the overall TSI level became lower, the trajectory changed more abruptly during that period, increasing accumulated energy. From a VMT energy viewpoint, although my TSI stroke values remained within a relatively softer zone after the stroke, the temporary rise of accumulated energy may indicate that my post-stroke biomedical system was still unstable and undergoing some degrees of ups and downs during the recovery adjustment process. Rather than reaching a fully stable condition, real biomedical systems in human bodies are almost never truly static. They are continuously adjusting, compensating, overshooting, relaxing, recovering, destabilizing, and rebalancing at the same time. That is actually a very realistic description of post-stroke recovery dynamics. Personal reflection. After my stroke, my brain became extremely sensitive to small changes in glucose and blood pressure. Sometimes I can almost feel the trajectory changes before seeing the numbers. Over the past 11 months, the TSI stroke model slowly evolved from a mathematical equation into an intuitive warning system inside my brain. I now measure blood pressure repeatedly throughout the day because occasional office measurements completely miss short-term spikes and rapid oscillations. I was never labeled as a chronic hypertension patient. However, one acute SBP spike of 175 mmHg nearly killed me. That experience taught me that short-term spikes can be extremely dangerous even when long-term averages appear acceptable. Conclusion: the study showed that statistical correlation and energy analysis describe different aspects of the same biomedical system. Correlation reflects geometric synchronization, while energy analysis reflects accumulated stress and triggering force. Although SBP showed only 11% statistical correlation with TSI stroke, its VMT energy contribution remained nearly equal to glucose and pulse pressure, with all three variables contributing approximately 1/3 each. This strongly supports the structure of the multiplicative TSI stroke equation. From my viewpoint, stroke risk is not controlled by one isolated number alone. Instead, it emerges from the interaction among long-term metabolic stress, vascular stiffness, and acute pressure force. Disclaimer: write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.